John chapter 10. John chapter 10. If you have a Bible, you can go there. Also, the Bible's in the seat back in front of you, and we're going to have it on the screen as well. John chapter 10. We've been in this series for the last 6 weeks talking about who Jesus is through the lens of what he said about himself in the book of John, where 7 different times he uses this phrase, I am, and then he goes through and talks about the different things that he is to us. And he's not only talking about his own character, but he's using this phrase, I am, which is actually a throwback to the divine name of God that God revealed to Moses way back at the burning bush when Moses asked, what is your name? And he said, I am. That's his name. And so Jesus is, throughout the book of John, using this phrase to not only talk about his own character, but to tie himself to God, to put himself on equal footing when it comes to his identity and his character as the Father. And so John 10:10, we start there, and it says, the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Don't you want a rich and satisfying life? I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep. It's almost hard to believe. It's been almost 18 years since 9/11. Can you believe that? 18 years since September 11th, 2001. I remember I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and along with the rest of the world, went to school that day. Well, the rest of the world didn't go to school necessarily, but along with them, we were watching the TV constantly throughout the day as we were just trying to process, like many of us, what was going on in our country as we watched the footage of the buildings burning and then coming down. Actually, all of my classes, they just let us watch the TV throughout all of our classes, except I had one class, and this teacher was such a stickler for the rules that he turned the TV off and he made us study our pre-planned curriculum instead of watching the news coverage. Do you know what class that was? U.S. history. Not a joke. Even then, I was like, I think this is a miss. I think this is one of the most important events we'll probably ever witness. But I was reading about 9/11 because, as we're going to look at today, Jesus is claiming to be the good shepherd, the person who knows what he's doing when it comes to caring. And so I was looking at old stories of people who made great sacrifice on 9/11 to save other people. And I came across this story of this gentleman named Wells Crowther, and he was an investment banker around the 100th floor level of one of the towers, I think the tower that was hit first. And he was up there, and once the tower was hit, he immediately jumped into action and began helping people get organized, to get down the stairs, to get towards safety. And it was during this effort that he came across a group of people that he would eventually lead down 17 flights of stairs. But with them was a woman, Lynn Young, who was badly burned from when the airplane hit. And so here she was, unable to move, unable to walk. And so Wells took her, and he grabbed her, and he put her on his back, and he carried her 17 flights of stairs down to safety. But he didn't just stop there. He continued to go back in the building and save more and more. And he's credited with at least 18 people lives were saved because he continued to go back into that building. And they found his body at several weeks later, still in the building, surrounded by some other police officers and gentlemen that were planning and trying to get more people out. He's just an investment banker. And I thought, there is probably, I can't think of a worse scenario. I can't think of a worse circumstance than being in the World Trade Center on 9/11. I mean, what possible situation could be worse than that? And yet, in that situation, if your name was Lynn Young and you were lying on the ground, badly burned, unable to move, can I tell you that the fact that Wells Crowther would be the one that would happen to come upon you and be available to carry you out would be life to you. You see, David wrote this in Psalms 23, King David. He wrote, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And what that initially sounds like, and other translations say, I don't want a thing. The Lord is my shepherd, I don't want a thing. And we think, well, okay, that's great. So we would assume that if David really lived that and believed that you would look at his life and you would find that David had it pretty good. That all his wants and desires and wishes were fulfilled because of what the Lord was to him. And then you read his story and you find tragedy, and you find he's a fugitive for a lot of his younger years. He's on the run. He loses children. He loses the ones he loves. People die around him. He's under attack and siege. He does not live by any stretch of the imagination a comfortable or easy life. And yet he writes this, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Because I think that there is a place where it's not based on our circumstances, that we can look at what is happening to us and say, there is no better person that I would rather be with than him. Just like Lynn going down those stairs, this situation is hell, and yet there is no one I would rather be with than Wells right now. Because why? Because he has the ability to care for me well. He cared her safety. I think about when my wife was sick a couple years ago, and going through all these different appointments and meeting different doctors and having to choose and put together a team of doctors, and really coming to the place by the time that the treatment started for my wife, feeling like this is like the best team of doctors and care professionals that we could get. There is nobody outside of this that we would rather have when it comes to dealing with this diagnosis. There was a confidence and a contentment in the care we were getting, even when the circumstance was terrible. Now, you contrast that with a friend of mine who needed an outpatient procedure done and found out that it was not going to be covered by his insurance. And so he went online and found the cheapest surgeon he could possibly find within a day's drive. And he told me that as he was getting ready, I think it was in the guy's basement that he was at when the procedure was happening, but as he's getting ready for this procedure, he's thinking, is the cheapest option really the best when it comes to a surgeon? I think I might have made a terrible mistake. Craigslist is maybe not the option you want to go for to find someone who's going to cut you. Just going to throw it out there. We need confidence in those that care for us. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. I've always read that and thought he's good, as in he's loving and he's kind, he's fair, he's just, he's good. And while that is true, that's kind of like saying that Muhammad Ali was a good boxer because he was kind and he was, no, because he was awesome at boxing. Michael Phelps is a good swimmer, not because he's kind to children and he gives, people rides in his car. He might do that. That's great. Why do we know about the goodness of Michael Phelps? Because he's really good when he gets in a swimming pool. Can I tell you, Jesus is the good shepherd not only because he's kind and loving, because when it comes to caring for his sheep, us, he's really good at this. He is the greatest at it. He is the best. There is no other pasture that is more cared for. There's no other flock that is better tended to. There's no place you can go outside of the care of Christ to find what he offers. Why? Because he is the good shepherd. There is no one greater. And many of us, maybe you're in this boat like I am, we have tried to find greener pastures outside of his care, and we will find over and over again that we never had it as good as when we were with him. Never. He is the good shepherd. And he's talking to people in this crowd as Jesus is teaching who at that very moment are plotting to kill him. And they are not some villains or criminals from the outside, outlaws that are coming in. The people that are in the crowd that Jesus is talking to that are trying to kill him are the leaders of the community. They're religious leaders, they're the political center of their community, and they all want Jesus dead, and he's speaking to them, and he's saying, I am the good shepherd. Read between the lines, he's saying, you have some bad shepherds among you, and don't think that what they are doing is how you were designed to be led. We are too easily led by bad shepherds. And Jesus comes, he says, I'm going to give you a new model. I am the greatest at this. There's no one better. That's my first point today. He's good at this. He's good at caring for us. He is good at providing our needs. You know, in Israel, great pastures for sheep don't just happen, kind of like in Central Oregon. You don't just come upon soft, rich ground filled with naturally occurring, delicious grass for sheep. It takes work. I mean, my neighbor tried to dig a swimming pool in his yard. It quickly turned into a wading pool. Why? Because we got rocks everywhere, right? And this is the nature of, if you're a good shepherd in first century where Jesus is talking, it means that you do a lot of work long before the sheep ever arrive to prepare for their needs. And I believe this about Jesus, is that when you come into a place where you are under his care, it isn't like he just started thinking of you the day you showed up. All your life, he has been planning and preparing and tilling the soil and getting the environment correct so that when you are under his care, he's already ready for you. He's a good shepherd. He's a good shepherd. Let's continue in John chapter 10, verse 12. A hired hand will run when he sees the wolf coming. He will abandon the sheep because they don't belong to him, and he isn't their shepherd. And so the wolf attacks them and scatters the flock. The hired hand runs away because he's working only for the money and doesn't really care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me, just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father. So I sacrifice my life for the sheep. It is a marked difference in how people behave, whether they are doing something for the money or just because it's their job, or whether they are doing something because they have ownership and a stake in what is happening. And you can see this, go out and eat today after lunch, after service, and have lunch. There you go. You'll find it. There's people that treat it like a job, and there's people that are in it as a career. They're invested. If you go to an owner-run establishment, there's a different kind of care that happens when the person that is interacting with you is the owner. Have you ever tried to sneak in snacks or candy or sodas into a movie theater that you brought from the outside? Oh, of course not. We're Christians, Pastor Evan. We would never. We pay full price at the concession stand. Good people. Me too. And we used to do this, my friends and I, and very bad. We would try to see who could sneak in the largest amount of snacks and drink. And I won this competition once. I don't remember what the movie was. It was a lot of years ago, but I snuck in a 32-ounce Jamba Juice without spilling a drop in my pants. It was 15 years ago. The pants were bigger at that time. Cargo pants were, maybe they were in. They probably weren't in. I just was wearing them. But what you realize is a lot of the people that are taking your tickets, they don't really care to enforce every single rule. They're not there to ensure the overall success of Regal Cinemas International. They're there because it's their job to take your ticket. It's different when it's the owner. It's different when there's somebody whose whole life is wrapped up in the transaction. It's different. I grew up here in town on the east side, and there used to be a golf course called Orion Greens. Anybody ever golfed at Orion Greens? All right. There you guys are. Good for you. I don't know what to say. But we lived near Orion Greens, and some of you can picture right now because you golfed there. And me and my friends, we'd ride our bikes to Orion Greens, and then we would walk around the edges of the golf course, and we would steal golf balls from the driving range, and then sometimes we would steal golf balls from people who were currently playing golf on the course. We didn't understand that just because it's out of bounds doesn't mean they don't want it anymore. And so we would literally steal these balls, and one time, I remember it very clearly because we had laid our bikes down, and then we were walking around finding golf balls, and this group of golfers found our bikes. And they knew what was going on. And they knew we were probably within earshot, so they loudly started talking about all the horrible things they were going to do to our bikes and to the children who were riding those bikes if they ever found them. And they went on. And even at the time, as a little kid, I was like, man, these golfers are bad people. They're just so mean to children. But it scared us. I mean, it really scared us. And so we, as soon as the golfers went on by, we quickly grabbed our bikes, and we stopped doing that. But here's what happened. One of my good friends in the neighborhood, his name was Austin, and his grandpa, I found out later, was actually the owner of Orion Greens. It was the family business. And so we would go visit Grandpa Orion, I forget his name, Grandpa Orion, and we weren't hiding in the bushes anymore. We were guests of the owner, thank you very much. And we would stroll right into that clubhouse, and we would have as much root beer as we could handle, you know? Because why? Because we were guests of the one who controlled the access. Last week, Pastor Steve talked about how Jesus is the gate. He controls the access. And too oftentimes I find myself out of insecurity and out of doubt and out of a place where I'm not quite sure if I deserve what kind of arrangement Jesus has prepared for me, that I want to be kind of hiding in the bushes, scraping off what I can and living around the edges of the life that Jesus has prepared for me. And he says, hey, hello, I know you. I recognize you. I call you by name. You don't belong in the bushes. Come on, walk through the front door and hold your head up high. Because why? Because you're so great? No, you're just a kid. But because I know you. And I'm going to allow you access because of the relationship that we now share. My second point, he knows us. He knows us. David also wrote this. He didn't just write the 23rd Psalm, of course. He wrote Psalm 139, and maybe you've heard this before as well, but he wrote this, and I want you to think of it as I read it from the perspective of a shepherd and a sheep, okay? Psalms 139, you have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit, and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all of my ways. I've read that so many times, but when you think about it, a shepherd saying, I know my sheep. Any dog owners here? Any dog owners? It's Central Oregon. All of you have dogs. My parents have these dogs, and they love these dogs. They love these dogs. My parents watched last service, so I think I can talk about them freely, and they'll never know. But when we go over and we house sit for my parents, sometimes the list of instructions to take care of these dogs is like 3 pages long, front and back, 10-point, single spaced. You know, like there is instructions. Because to try to communicate all of the knowledge of this relationship that my dad has with these animals on paper, it takes a lot. Why? Because the relationship is actually pretty close. I read those pages, all 3, and I'm like, I wish we were this close, Dad. You know? I wish you gave me heartworm medicine morning and night. There's a knowledge that God wants to express to you that you could be fully known by him and accepted just the way you are. That when a sheep comes through the gate, rejection doesn't come if they're limping. Rejection doesn't come if they're hurting. Rejection doesn't come if they're hungry. But it's in this close relationship that the shepherd so lovingly and expertly can know exactly what's going on in your heart and your life, maybe that no one else knows, and still say, I accept you. And there's great liberty, and there's a great sense of freedom in my heart when I think that everything in the depths of my soul, the good, the bad, and the ugly could come before God, be laid out plain as day, and he would look at that, and he would look me in the eye and say, Evan, I accept you. In fact, the Apostle Paul would write this about heaven. He would say that heaven in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is not just the place where we would know many things and know all things, but it would be the place where we would be fully known. That paradise, heaven, eternity, it looks like us being able to be fully us, fully transparent, and fully loved by God. He knows me. This past Wednesday evening, my wife was getting dinner ready, and my daughter asked if she could go play outside because the weather is finally good enough to play outside, and all the parents were like, amen, the kids can go outside now again. And so she was going to go outside, and she asked if she could go across the street to her friend's house, and dinner was almost ready, so Alyssa said, no, why don't you just stay in our yard, but you can go outside and play. So she goes outside. About 15, 20 minutes go by, and dinner's ready. So Alyssa goes out and calls her name, and no response. So she walks out into the yard, calls again, no response. We don't have a large yard. If she was there, it would be obvious. So she goes into that was the side yard. She goes to the backyard. No Clara. So she comes into me, and she says, have you seen Clara? Did she come back in? And I looked at her, and I was like, it was your job to watch her. So I turned so quickly on you. I'm so sorry. But I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I thought she was outside. She was outside. And so we have this conversation. Parents, maybe you've had this conversation before. And so I think, well, maybe she's upstairs and we didn't see her come in. So I run upstairs. I call her name, don't hear her. I go next door to her friend's house. She has one little girl friend in the neighborhood. So I go to their house, ring the doorbell, knock on they're not home. Look in the street. No Clara. So I had been pretty calm up to that point, but then a switch is flipped and you go into full freak out mode. Do you know what this feels like? So I rush into the house, I throw open the door, run into the house, go upstairs, and I'm thinking maybe she's playing hide and seek and thinks this is a hilarious joke. So I'm yelling and saying, if you can hear me, you got to let me know. I'm pulling blankets up and full freak out mode. Go downstairs. Alyssa's out in the middle of the street. No shoes. She's holding our 1-year-old. He's got no pants on. Looking for Clara, asking the other neighbor boys, have you seen our daughter? Full freak out mode. And so we walk up and down the street. We go down the street and around the corner, and not far from our house, but completely out of sight, there she is. She met 2 new friends and had just wandered far enough to where we couldn't find her. She wasn't even in trouble. Like it wasn't that, she didn't actually walk that far, but it was just far enough, and she had no idea, but we were freaking out, looking for her. Jesus tells a story in Luke chapter 15 about how when a shepherd who has 100 sheep loses one, what that shepherd does. And he says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them, doesn't he leave the 99 in open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And I've always heard this story, and I thought, in my mind, the shepherd got all the sheep home, all the 99 safe at home in the pen, locked the gate, put the key in the pocket, and then went to look for the one. But actually what it says in Jesus' parable, he says the shepherd abandons the 99 in open country where they're vulnerable and left to their own to go find the one. What he's saying the shepherd goes into full freak-out mode. Because when it's your kid, when it's your thing, when it's the one that you love, listen, there is nothing that will take your attention away from the task of finding that which has wandered. There's just nothing. You could have told me any shocking news. You could have tried to distract me in any way until I had found my daughter. Listen, nothing would have distracted me. The shepherd abandons the 99. Why? Because there is one who has wandered. And I maybe you don't feel lost. I don't necessarily feel lost very often. I'm not in some ditch somewhere, high out of my mind, committing crime. I'm not, we have these categories of what we consider being so far away from God, but there's seasons in our lives where it's not that we've gotten so lost. We feel like we know where we are, but we've wandered just far enough and just turned enough corners to where we're out of his sight. And we stay there long enough and we begin to have these thoughts that maybe it doesn't even matter. I mean, I go to Westside and look around, there's so many people. What do I matter? What does it matter at all if I just kind of let myself drift off? And we don't understand that in those moments that Jesus is the good shepherd, and that means that he's in full freak out mode for you. That every step outside of his view is a moment where he is completely consumed. His attention is fully upon finding you. And we have this sense, I think, so many times that it's out of sight, out of mind, that if we walk away from God, he'll be just fine, and that we will drift from his attention. And the opposite is so true, is that when we wander, when we're lost, when we're hurt, when we're afraid, we have all of his attention. The parable continues. When the shepherd finds the sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders, and he goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice for me, I have found my lost sheep. You notice he doesn't go back for the 99. They're just out in open country forever, I guess. Because the shepherd is just so delighted in finding that which was lost. He's just so overwhelmed. He's like, shepherding aside, let's just party. I've got my lamb. I've got my sheep. And the image here is that he grabs the sheep and he puts it on his shoulders. And what that means is that he's holding the sheep's legs as he makes the journey home. Another passage in Scripture in the Old Testament talks about how God is our shepherd, and it talks about him picking up the lost sheep of Israel and tucking them into the folds of his cloak to carry them. And I thought about my son, my 1-year-old. He's so full of energy, and he's like strong. He's like a little and so he's hard to hold. And if we're out and about, we were in Portland just a few days ago, and trying to carry him in the city and walk any distance is so hard. And so we have one of those baby front packs, you know. It looks really cool. That's mainly why I wear it. The guys come up to me like, "That looks so cool, man." It's not true. But we have this baby front pack, and we'll take my son and we'll put him in this pack, and then we'll cinch it down really tight. Like he can breathe, but it's pretty tight. And when he's restricted, when he's in this place of restriction where he's so close to me that he can't wiggle free, and he realizes that, you know what will happen is he'll sleep. And it could be an hour past his nap time normally, and he will stay awake through anything, but when he's restricted and pulled close, he falls asleep. And I think a picture that we can find in this story that Jesus is telling, and the nature of him as the good shepherd, is that he comes and he finds us wandering and lost and left to our own devices, and he comes and he brings some restriction into our lives that gives us rest. He pulls some straps tight, and we say, "Oh, that's too tight, God, that's too tight." But that's where we find our rest. That's where we find freedom from anxiety. That's where we find that we don't have to be watching over our shoulder and watching our back and looking out for number one. And if I don't take care of my own, and we allow Jesus to hold us in his cloak and pull us tight, we find rest for our souls. And if you've ever been made to feel inadequate or disqualified because of your wandering, what I read today is that we have a shepherd who would go to the ends of the earth and back to death itself and not flinch to get sheep who wander, to get sheep who have lost their way. You say, "Well, my religious neighbor wrote me off. Some pastor told me I wasn't good." Listen, the shepherd says, "You're enough. You're worth it. You're worth it." And he comes in full freak-out mode to find us. I want to close our time together today. We're gonna read the 23rd Psalm together. Such a beautiful picture of what Jesus offers to us is there are days in green pastures. As we'll read in a second, there are plenty of times, and I love those times, when he leads me by still waters and restores my soul. He makes me lie down in green pastures. I read this week that sheep won't lie down in the presence of things that make them nervous, whether it be the potential of a threat or whether it be pests, insects in their ears. They won't lie down until the environment has been set. There are times when Jesus will come in miraculous ways, and he'll set the environment for you to have rest. There's also times when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But he's there too. He comforts us there too. And we find a picture all through the book of John, all through the story of Jesus, and all through today's text of someone who really doesn't promise great circumstances, except that they'll come, yeah. And the opposite will come too, but I will be with you always. And when you get too far away, I will find you always. And so I want to rest in this. Let me pray for you, and then we're going to read this together. Jesus, would you just come to be the good shepherd today? The kind shepherd, the loving shepherd, the just shepherd, but also the shepherd who is better than any other shepherd, better than any other leader, better than any other caretaker for our souls, that you would come and you would be our shepherd. Father, for those that are in green pasture days, we thank you. We love it when you guide us into those places of peace and calm and rest. But Lord, for those that are in the valley of the shadow of death, would you pull them even closer to you, that in those moments today they would find rest for their souls. And Father, for those that maybe have wandered or are wandering, feel lost today, Jesus, would you go in full freak out mode? Would you run up and down the street? Would you shout from the rooftops until you find the one who is missing? Now, with your eyes closed in this moment, if that's you, and either you feel lost or you feel like you've wandered, and today you want to be found by the Good Shepherd, you want Jesus to wrap you up and pull you close and give you rest. Would you just raise your hand real quick, just between me and you and God? Yeah, hands all over. Oh, Jesus, would you come and bring rest? A confidence in your care, contentment by your side and strapped to your chest, that they would find rest for their souls. Oh, we're grateful for what you do. We're grateful that we aren't in this alone, that you're close and you love us. Pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you stand with me just in honor of this passage, and we will close and dismiss the service by reading this together. Let's begin. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God bless you guys. You're dismissed.